Now, I don't want all of you listening to this to start looking really closely at that window if you're high up and going, pessimism is pessimism. It's a philosophical idea, but I already gave you the way out. This is the perfect justification for consuming more superhero stories, be it on television or at the movies or comic books. When people ask you why you lose yourself in these things all the time, you go, it's to stave off the inevitable suffering that is the human experience, which itself reflects the fundamental forces of reality. What more of a justification could you want for reading comic books? Perfect. We are going to leave pessimism aside. I offer it as a view to consider, to contemplate, to perhaps point to for a moment, and then run as far away, as fast away as you can. Okay. We're going to turn now to a philosophical tradition that emerges from considering some of these darker themes, or at least by looking a little bit more seriously at the human condition, the human experience, and that's existentialism. Existentialism emerged in the 40s, in the 50s, and the 60s. It was considered to be a dead school of philosophical thought, though it has reached a resurgence. Almost always when a school of philosophical thought is considered dead, it eventually comes back. I am not an existentialist, though like so many other people, I was attracted to it at some point in time, and I by no means am going to be giving you in the short amount of time an exhaustive understanding of this philosophical tradition. Like with so much else, I just want to give you a taste of it so that you may explore it as you want. So let's think a little bit now about existentialism. The core idea comes from Sartre, and it's a slogan that you can put on a shirt or a bumper sticker, or when you wake up you can mutter on your lips first thing in the morning, and that is existence precedes essence. There you go. There's existentialism. I don't think I have anything else to say. And of course I have more to say, right? Because I have no idea at first what existence precedes essence means, and you probably don't either. But let's think a little bit about how existentialists think about these things. Existentialists, and here I'm thinking about Jean-Paul Sartre, I'm thinking about Albert Camus, I'm thinking about Martin Heidegger. The ancestors to existentialism include individuals like Soren Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche, and we'll mention them in a moment. But Sartre, for our purposes, was one of the most outstanding existentialists. And the idea of existentialism, and again, I do want to give this with a warning that existentialists disagree considerably about whether this is the best characterization of it or not. But they looked at the history of philosophy and they're a little bit discouraged because philosophy, Western philosophy in particular, was just concerned with the sort of things, quite frankly, that we've been doing in this course. It looks at what it is for an object to be what it is, and it seems so dry. Here is an object. It is a substance. It has these various properties or characteristics or attributes. Some of these properties it has essentially. Other of these properties it has accidentally. Sound familiar? We've covered this material. And they said, is that how we're supposed to think about what it is to be a human being? It's this substance that has a variety of properties. Some of them are essential properties, properties that if this thing lost those properties, it would cease to exist. Others of them are accidental properties. Essentially, I am, say, I have a certain DNA. Accidentally, I'm a certain height. I could have been a little bit shorter, a little bit taller, et cetera, et cetera. Is this what it is for us to give an analysis of existing? No, no, no. They said that before you get into all that essence and what it is essentially to be human, you need to think about existing. You need to think about acting. You need to think about doing. That's, to me, what the heart of existentialism is about. It's about action. It's about decisions. It's about choice. It's about doing things. That's what defines who you are, much more than some set of properties ever will. It's a complete inversion of the set of philosophical priorities that many people had. Existentialism asks us to refocus our attention on the lives we are in fact living, the things we are in fact doing, not the static view of what we are in and of ourselves. That's, in some sense, the spirit behind what it means to say existence precedes essence. What are you doing? Who are you? What are you essentially? Don't talk to me. Do things. I'm going to find the answer to that in what you do. In fact, I'm going to discover who I am essentially in the decisions that I make, in the way that I exercise my freedom, a lot sooner than I'm going to do by stepping outside of myself and trying to figure out what the list of essential properties are that I have. Now, rather than continuing to unpack this as a view, I just want to spend a little time giving you some of the ideas of some of my favorite individuals who are broadly located within the existentialist tradition, which includes people like Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, who, again, for some, they are existentialists. For others, they just anticipated existentialism. We're not going to concern ourselves with how to divide logical space. I think that looking at Kierkegaard and Nietzsche are great ways of looking at how existentialists can at least animate you to thinking about philosophical concerns a little bit differently than what we've been doing in this course up to this moment. So someone like, Kierkegaard is concerned broadly, and again, this is going very quickly over a lot of material. Kierkegaard was a very religious person. And for him, he was, one of the things he was preoccupied with was, what is it to be a Christian? And he was scandalized when he looked around him and he saw a whole bunch of other Christians. And he looked and he saw that everyone could be a Christian so easily. Now, this is where Kierkegaard was located. Please keep in mind that for many people in the world, being a Christian isn't easy at all. But in Kierkegaard's context, Christianity had won the day. Everyone could practice their faith more or less straightforwardly. It was the norm. Everyone was a Christian. I'm speaking in exaggerations here, but for him, this was a real problem, because as he read the Gospels, to be a Christian was something existential. It was an orientation of one's whole self. It was a subjective affirmation of something deep and powerful and shattering, not just going through these rote rituals every Sunday or every day or whatever. It wasn't something ordinary at all. It was something extraordinary. Most importantly, it was something risky. It was something that you had to have a kind of radical commitment to. He didn't feel that there was any kind of radical commitment whatsoever to the way that you could have been a Christian in his context. And here he points to stories in the Bible, both in the New Testament and the Old Testament. He's thinking about Abraham, and he says, look at Abraham. Abraham hears, God say, I want you to kill your own child. And that puts, Abraham in what we might call an existential predicament. What do you mean? At the one hand, you're God. I'm supposed to follow your will. At the other hand, you're asking me to kill an innocent person who's my son. Kierkegaard says, moments like that test one's faith. And that's where lived Christian experience is supposed to be, in those moments of fear and trembling when you don't know already what the right answer is. You have to commit yourself, in a sense, blindly. You have to take, here comes a famous phrase from Kierkegaard, a leap of faith. It is a radical subjective commitment to a certain set of principles. So for Kierkegaard, a good Christian life was one that was lived in this kind of uncertainty that one nevertheless committed oneself to. It was someone giving you a tremendous amount of evidence that nothing in the Bible is true, that Jesus never existed, that the whole thing was a sham, and you not ignoring that evidence, but you taking it in and going, yes, and I choose to believe anyways. I choose to follow this tradition despite it being perhaps absurd. Now, that's going to rub some people very much the wrong way, but this is how Kierkegaard is approaching these things. To him, if there's no cost, if there's no serious commitment, then you're not living a life of faith. That's the spirit of existentialism. It's a focus on what you're doing rather than on some abstract set of arguments for or against the existence of God, say, which we looked at, or anything else. It's about you and what you're doing. And the language that emerges from Kierkegaard, and what we're about to see in a moment from Nietzsche, very much paves the way for Sartre, Camus, and others. I hope that helps convey some of what's behind this broad way of philosophical reasoning. So Nietzsche's on a different side of this. So Kierkegaard was concerned with, how does he authentically live as a Christian in a context in which, on his view, it was too easy to be a Christian? And from his reflection, then, this come the seeds of existentialist thinking. Nietzsche was on the other side and started off with the idea, how do I live a life of meaning once I take as a premise that God is dead? Nietzsche was an atheist and was very much part of a tradition in existentialism of atheism, though it can go across the board. There have been very Christian thinkers like Kierkegaard Kierkegaard, who are existentialists. Nietzsche is an interesting historical figure. It's worth mentioning right from the start a few things about Nietzsche. He was rehabilitated decades and decades ago in no small part by a Princeton philosopher, Walter Kaufmann, who rescued the study of Nietzsche from obscurity, an obscurity partly well-deserved. The Nazis had used much of what Nietzsche had written to justify their own atrocities in World War II. What we only learned later, and in part thanks to Kaufmann, was Nietzsche himself was very much opposed to anti-Semitism. In fact, he railed against it regularly, but his sister was a Nazi. Nietzsche, at the latter part of his life, did collapse into complete insanity. Some people blame syphilis for this. Some people have another story. But he didn't die immediately. He lived quite some time after that. I think at least a decade. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's at least a decade, during which time he was under the care of his sister, who conveniently edited out all the portions of his writing that said what's happening in Germany, and I can't believe this stuff with anti-Semitism, and just captured this talk of being great and being an quote-unquote an overman and all the rest of it, and passed it along. And of course, when you take things piecemeal, you can turn it into whatever you want. So I feel that a great service has been done to the study of Nietzsche now that we've had for decades and decades the complete corpus of his works. He still leaves a lot of people cold. He leaves a lot of people cold because God is dead is what is one of the centerpiece slogans of his thought. Needless to say that it is going to upset a lot of people. Even those who don't care about that are very frustrated with Nietzsche's way of writing. Nietzsche's not the sort of person who you easily just pick up and dive in. He writes with aphorisms. He writes in metaphor. He writes in what seems at times to be stream of consciousness. He does not give us carefully argued pieces, but there have been a lot of scholars over many years who have said, no, there's a lot here if you have the patience and time to look at what's being said. And for many people, what makes Nietzsche so interesting is the way that he's doing philosophy is in some sense an example of the kind of philosophy that he's tried to convey. We don't have time to get into all of that. What I do want to just mention is that for Nietzsche, for him, the kind of existential predicament was God's dead. What do I mean by that? For Nietzsche, the thought was, when you had a belief in God dominating a society or dominating a culture, you had an authority, a master authority, and you had a morality that was dictated into the fabric of the universe itself. There's God. God has determined the right and the wrong, the good and the bad. The universe has been organized in a way in which those moral principles are as immutable as the principles of physics, and it is our job to figure out what the will of God is and to follow it. That's a conception of a universe in which there is a God. But once you believe that God is dead, once you remove that authority from the universe, you've also removed the authority of traditional morality. Now it's on us. It's waking up and realizing that there is no cosmic father figure or mother figure. We're on our own. If there is a morality, it's one that we have to create for ourselves. It's not one that's written into the fabric of the universe. It's not one that's been dictated by something else. It's on us or it's on no one at all. In this sense, to borrow a phrase from Sartre, I'm going back and forth, we're radically free. All things are possible. But for Nietzsche, this is also something that puts a tremendous amount of pressure on us. Most of us are going to fail, according to Nietzsche. He disparagingly calls most people part of the herd. And the herd believes in a herd morality, a kind of morality that he thinks captures a kind of old-fashioned resentment towards the powerful. But if you can somehow lift yourself out of that, if you can be a great person, according to Nietzsche, you'll be the kind of person who recognizes that God is dead, that the herd has no more authority over you than a non-existent God, and you can create for yourself what he might call a new tablet or table of values. You can determine what is valuable and what is not, what is good and what is bad, what is right and what is wrong. You get to decide those things, and you have to live it. You don't get to just say it. You have to live by it. You are in some sense committing your entire existence to the set of values that you are putting onto the world without the comfort of thinking that you're aligning yourself with a pre-established moral reality, or anything else for that matter, in terms of a pre-existent authority. It's both liberating and terrifying. And for Nietzsche, very few people would be these great individuals. And for many other people, when reading Nietzsche, his talk seems fairly obnoxious. But there was something to what he was saying. If you think that there is not this kind of external authority, at some point it does seem that it comes down to us. The last existentialist I'm going to talk about is Camus, and I'm going to pick up with Nietzsche. So Nietzsche tells us if God's dead, we are the moral authors of our lives, and Camus certainly was influenced by Nietzsche and others. Camus is famous for giving us perhaps the most worked out idea of the absurd. This is often expressed in his fiction as well as in his more explicit philosophy. So many people in high school and college read The Stranger. Here's this guy at some point towards the end of the book. He shoots another guy on the beach. Why did you shoot him? Well, because the sun was in my eyes. What, that's crazy? No, it's just absurd. There's no more meaningful, that act is no more meaningful because the sun is in your eyes than anything else. Camus starts off his more philosophical book, The Myth of Sisyphus, by saying that philosophy must wrestle with the question of suicide. He gives us Sisyphus as an example of what he thinks lived human experience is life. Life is fundamentally meaningless, but not therefore not worth living. Sisyphus is a character that pushes a rock up a hill all day, only to watch the rock roll back down every night. Sisyphus goes back down the hill, pushes the rock uphill all day, only to have it roll back down at night ad infinitum. To Camus, life doesn't have any pre-established meaning. It does not make it not worth living, according to him. He tells us that we must imagine Sisyphus happy. But here we see someone else who's wrestling with this fundamental question, that if life is not meaningful due to some cosmic dictates, because a God has made it meaningful, because there has been some external authority that has granted us purpose. If the universe is fundamentally purposeless, then it's up to us to add purpose to it, and we must recognize that we are very finite beings, and so we're never going to have the kind of satisfaction that comes with following the purpose of the universe. It's just going to be much more limited. It's going to be our meaning, our purpose, what we choose to put into things, and that disappears when we disappear as well. For some people, that's terrifying. For others, it's liberating, and for many others, it's both. But that's existentialism. And it invites us to look on our lives and ask, what is the value of life if it turns out to be the case that the life doesn't come with prepackaged value? If there isn't an architect or a designer behind it who is there to tell us that this is the value of life, this is the purpose of our existence, this is what we ought to do. If that's all gone, how do we live a meaningful life in the absence of an existence that comes with meaning built into it? That's existentialism, and it's a fascinating philosophical school that I hope you've had some fun thinking about for these few short minutes with me now.